When Prince Harry agreed to sit down with Jake Tapper on CNN, producers expected a thoughtful, perhaps even redemptive interview. A chance for the Duke of Sussex to reclaim some dignity after months of controversy. But within minutes of the cameras rolling, it was clear this wouldn't be a polite conversation. Harry's confidence verged on arrogance, Jake's patience on the edge of steel. By the time it was over, the studio would fall into stunned silence, and Harry would walk out of CNN's headquarters mid-broadcast. The CNN studio was unusually quiet that evening, the kind of silence that hums before something memorable happens. Jake Tapper reviewed his notes calmly, his expression unreadable. He'd interviewed generals, senators, and presidents, but tonight's guest was different. When Prince Harry entered the studio, the energy changed. Dressed in a tailored gray jacket and an open-collared white shirt, he greeted the crew with a polite but distant nod. There was confidence in his walk, or perhaps defiance disguised as confidence. Jake stood to shake his hand. "Harry, thank you for joining us tonight." "Pleasure," Harry replied smoothly, though his tone was more formal than warm. "Good to be here, I suppose." They took their seats across from each other. The opening music faded, the red light on the main camera blinked on, and the interview began. "Prince Harry," Jake said, his signature calm filling the room. "You've often said that living in America has given you a new sense of freedom. I'd like to start there. How is that freedom treating you?" Harry leaned back, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Well, Jake, freedom's quite nice. Waking up without being told what to do by a 100-year-old institution tends to be refreshing." Jake smiled politely, as if expecting that tone. "So life in California suits you?" "It's paradise," Harry said with a shrug. "The air's cleaner, the press is marginally less hostile, though not by much, and people actually smile when you walk past them." "You miss the UK at all?" Jake asked lightly. Harry's expression sharpened. "I miss certain people, not the circus. The rest, I can live without." There it was, the first crack in the charm. Jake noticed it, but didn't press yet. "You've spoken about how stepping back from royal duties allowed you and your family to live a more authentic life," Jake continued. "How would you describe that authenticity now?" Harry crossed one leg over the other, the picture of control. "Authenticity," he repeated. "It's about not performing for anyone. I'm finally free to be who I am, not who the monarchy, the tabloids, or the world wants me to be." Jake tilted his head slightly. "That's an interesting statement. You've done several interviews, a documentary series, even a memoir, all about defining who you are in the public eye. Isn't that still a performance?" Harry's smirk faded. "You could say that," he replied slowly. "Or you could say I'm taking control of my own story for once. I think that's something most journalists wouldn't understand." Jake's eyes flickered with amusement. "You might be surprised what journalists understand." Harry leaned forward, the faintest edge in his voice. "Well, understanding and compassion aren't the same thing, are they?" "No," Jake replied evenly, "but facts and feelings are not either." The air in the studio tightened. Harry chuckled quietly, though it didn't sound genuine. "You're good at this, Jake. You always have that tone, tamed, reasonable, slightly patronizing. It must work wonders on politicians." Jake didn't flinch. "It's not meant to be patronizing." "Just curious," Harry repeated, his voice dripping with irony. "That's a nice way of saying intrusive." Jake folded his hands on the desk, his professionalism unwavering. "I think the public is curious about a man who's made a career out of rejecting the spotlight, while standing in one." Harry's eyes narrowed. "You mean people like you?" "I mean the audience," Jake said, still calm. "The same people who watched your Netflix special, read your book, and tuned in tonight to hear your side again." Harry gave a soft laugh, though it carried no warmth. "And you think that makes me a hypocrite?" "I didn't say that," Jake said carefully. "But it's a fair question, isn't it? You've spoken openly about privacy, yet you've shared incredibly personal details about your family. Where's the line?" Harry's jaw tightened. "The line," he said firmly, "is where I draw it. No one else." Jake nodded slowly. "Even if that line keeps moving?" That one landed. Harry's expression darkened. You sound like the British tabloids, Jake. Next thing you'll tell me is that I'm ungrateful for wanting peace. Jake leaned back, unbothered. I'm just asking what peace looks like when it's on camera. Harry exhaled sharply, visibly frustrated now. You see, that's the problem. People like you don't want peace. You want content. You want a headline that says, Harry loses his temper. You want a moment like this. Jake looked directly at him. You're giving it to me. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Harry sat back, eyes locked on Jake's, his smile gone. The room felt smaller, the cameras closer. Somewhere in the control booth, a producer whispered, keep rolling. Jake straightened his notes, his voice low and steady. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about family, legacy, and what Prince Harry says he's really fighting for. The red light on the camera blinked off, but the tension didn't. Harry leaned in, voice low but cold. You wanted a reaction, didn't you? Jake replied without looking up from his papers. No, Your Highness. Just an honest answer. Harry's jaw flexed. You won't get one if you keep treating me like a headline. Jake finally looked up, meeting his glare. Then stop acting like one. The control room went silent again. The break hadn't even started, and already the interview was on the edge of explosion. The studio lights flickered back on. The crew moved quietly, as if afraid that one wrong sound could shatter the thin layer of civility holding the room together. When the red light above camera one turned on again, Jake Tapper smiled smoothly for the audience. His tone was calm, professional, but beneath it, there was an edge of determination. Welcome back, he said. We're here with Prince Harry, discussing his life, his work, and the choices that have shaped both. Harry nodded stiffly, his expression polite but guarded. I hope we can keep this on track, he said with a tight smile. Jake ignored the jab. Let's talk about your family for a moment. You've said that you stepped back to protect them. Do you feel that mission has been successful? Harry took a slow breath. My family's safety is my priority. Meghan and I are raising our children away from the chaos of the British media, away from the constant lies. In that sense, yeah, it's been successful. Do you ever worry, Jake continued gently, that by talking about your family so publicly, you have actually invited more attention to them? Harry's lips pressed into a thin line. I find it fascinating how people keep circling back to that narrative. I talk about my story, not my children's. The press, however, doesn't seem to know the difference. Jake nodded slowly. But you did discuss some deeply personal moments in your memoir. Conversations with your father, private messages between you and your brother. Harry cut him off, voice sharp, because people deserve to know the truth. For years, the palace and the media painted me as unstable, reckless, even disloyal. What was I supposed to do? Sit in silence while they sold lies about my life? Jake maintained his calm. Maybe not silence, he said carefully, but perhaps restraint. Harry's eyebrows lifted. Restraint? After decades of being misrepresented? After watching what that machine did to my mother? The name hung in the air. Diana. Jake hesitated for a beat, then asked quietly, Do you think you're still haunted by what happened to her? Harry's face tightened instantly. Haunted? It's not an accusation, Jake clarified quickly. It's a question. You've often mentioned her in interviews. That sense of being pursued, misunderstood, trapped. Do you ever feel like you're reliving her story? For a moment, Harry didn't answer. His gaze drifted off, and something flickered behind his eyes. Pain, maybe, or anger. Then he smiled, the cold kind. That's quite the psychological analysis, Jake. I didn't realize CNN had turned into a therapy session. Jake didn't smile back. It's an honest question, Harry. Harry leaned forward slightly, his tone lowering. And it's an offensive one. You're implying that I'm broken because of what happened to my mother. You're reducing my entire life to her tragedy. Jake stayed composed. I'm not reducing anything. I'm asking whether that loss shapes how you see the world today. Harry's jaw clenched. It shaped the way I see hypocrisy, especially in the media. The same industry that killed her is now pretending to care about my well-being. Forgive me if I don't feel like playing along. Jake's calm cracked just slightly. With respect, Harry, you're not being hunted by paparazzi in Montecito. You're living in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the United States. You've chosen to remain in the public eye. Harry's voice turned cold. That's rich, coming from someone who makes a living off other people's lives. A low murmur rippled through the crew. Jake took a breath, clearly restraining himself. I think there's a difference between journalism and spectacle. Harry scoffed. Oh, spare me. You're all the same, whether it's the tabloids in London or the networks here. You want drama, you want a headline, and you'll poke until someone bleeds. Jake straightened his papers, his patience thinning. If you're suggesting that asking questions is provocation, then perhaps you shouldn't be sitting here. Harry's tone sharpened. Maybe I shouldn't be. But it's interesting, isn't it, how fast the American press shows its true colors when you don't play nice. The air was thick enough to cut. Jake leaned forward now, abandoning the polished TV host demeanor. Harry, you've spent years talking about the media, blaming it, fighting it, profiting from it. You've built an entire brand around rejecting attention while constantly demanding it. Isn't that, Harry interrupted, his voice rising, watch your words. Jake didn't flinch. Isn't that contradiction exactly what makes people question your sincerity? The silence was electric. Harry's breathing grew shallow. You think this is some sort of act? You think losing my home, my titles, my privacy, all of that was a publicity stunt? Jake met his glare evenly. I think you've turned pain into a platform. And maybe that's fine, and maybe that's even brave. But when you step into the spotlight, you don't get to pick which questions follow you there. For a few seconds, no one moved. The tension was so heavy that even the cameras seemed to hum louder. Harry's tone dropped, icy and measured. You're crossing a line, Jake. Jake's reply came softly but firmly. Or maybe I'm just the first person you've talked to who didn't bow. The crew froze. Harry leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable now, a storm just beginning to form behind his eyes. You think you're clever, he muttered. Jake looked straight ahead. No, just doing my job. Harry gave a low, humorless laugh. You're going to regret that. Then we'll both have something to talk about next time, Jake said without missing a beat. But both of them knew there wouldn't be a next time. The interview break was seconds away, and yet the air felt like it could combust any moment. In the control booth, a producer whispered urgently, "Cut to break. Now." Before this explodes on air, the third segment of the CNN special began with a quiet tension that everyone in the studio could feel. The red recording light came back on, but the warmth from the beginning of the interview was gone. Jake Tapper sat with his hands folded neatly in front of him, posture unshakably professional. Prince Harry leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable, but his eyes betrayed irritation. Jake started carefully, his tone calm but deliberate. Before the break, you spoke about media intrusion and your desire for peace. Let me ask you this. Do you think there's ever a point where that pursuit of peace becomes a pursuit of control? Harry gave a dry laugh, though there was no humor in it. Control, Jake, I think I've earned the right to control my own life. After everything I've been through, that's not control. That's survival. Jake nodded. I understand that. But at the same time, your critics argue that you've used that same survival narrative as a brand, that it's no longer about peace. It's about staying relevant. Harry's expression turned icy. You mean the people who sit behind keyboards judging lives they don't understand? The same people who profit from my family's misery? Yes, I'm very concerned about their opinions. Jake remained steady. It's not about their opinions. It's about public perception. You've done a Netflix series, a memoir, countless interviews. People are starting to wonder, when does sharing your truth become selling it? Harry leaned forward slightly, his tone clipped. And there it is, the old cash-in accusation. You journalists can't resist it, can you? You spend years twisting stories, and when someone finally tells their side, suddenly it's exploitation. I'm not accusing, Jake said calmly. I'm asking. Same thing, Harry shot back. For a long moment, the two men just stared at each other, neither blinking, neither backing down. Jake finally broke the silence. "Let's talk about your brother, Prince William," he said gently. "There were reports that tensions between you two have—" Harry cut him off immediately. "No, I'm not doing this. I'm only asking if—" "No," Harry said again, sharper this time. "You don't get to sit here and turn this into another soap opera. My family issues are not your entertainment." Jake exhaled quietly. "Harry, you've already spoken about those issues publicly. You wrote about them in detail." "I wrote about my experience," Harry interrupted. "That doesn't mean I owe you or anyone an update." Jake nodded slightly, but his voice carried a bit more weight now. "Then help me understand. You've built an entire public identity around speaking your truth, but when someone asks you to elaborate, you call it intrusion. Isn't that a contradiction?" Harry laughed under his breath, shaking his head. "No, Jake. It's called setting boundaries, something your industry doesn't quite grasp." Jake leaned back, his patience visibly thinning. "Boundaries work both ways, Harry. You can't demand privacy while inviting cameras into your home." Harry's tone turned biting. "And you can't pretend to be objective when you're clearly enjoying the drama." Jake's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "I don't enjoy drama. I just don't run from hard questions." Harry smirked, but his words came out like daggers. "Of course not. You hide behind them." That landed like a slap. The crew went silent again, a sound tech looking up nervously from behind the console. Jake didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was lower, sharper. "You know, I've interviewed leaders during wars, survivors of atrocities, people who've gone through things they can barely speak about, and they somehow manage to answer without turning it into a performance." Harry's eyes flared. "A performance? You think this is an act?" Jake's tone was unflinching. "A thing you've learned to turn every question into a confrontation. Maybe that works in Hollywood, but not here." Harry's hands clenched on the armrest. "This isn't about Hollywood. This is about you trying to corner me." "I'm not trying to corner you," Jake replied evenly. "I'm trying to understand why you can't have a real conversation without making it about how misunderstood you are." Harry's voice rose. "Because I am misunderstood. You think you know me because you read headlines, because you've seen a few interviews. You have no idea who I am." Jake stayed perfectly still. "Then show us." The silence that followed was deafening. Harry's breathing was audible now, shallow, heavy. His face was flushed, his voice trembling slightly with restrained anger. "You don't get to tell me how to be," Harry said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "You sit here pretending to care about truth when all you want is a viral moment. That's what this is, isn't it? A royal outburst. Good for ratings." Jake's response came slowly. "You know what's interesting, Harry? Every time someone challenges you, you accuse them of having bad motives. Maybe that's not about them. Maybe that's about you." That stopped Harry cold. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then, leaning in with a glare that could freeze glass, he said quietly, "You're lucky I'm not my father." Jake blinked. "Excuse me?" Harry smirked faintly. He'd have walked out 10 minutes ago. Jake's reply was calm but cutting. Maybe he'd have handled it with more grace. The line hit hard. Harry's entire posture stiffened. The cameras were still rolling, the tension now unbearable. A producer behind the glass mouthed, "Cut?" But the director shook his head. It was too raw to stop. Harry exhaled sharply, staring Jake down. "You've just shown everyone exactly what's wrong with the media," he said. "No respect, no empathy, no idea what it's like to live under a microscope." Jake's voice stayed level. "Respect isn't given automatically, Harry. It's earned, even by princes." For a moment, no one breathed. Then Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping the studio floor. "You think you're clever," he said, his accent sharper now, colder. "But all you've done is prove why I left that entire world behind." Jake looked up at him, expression composed. "And yet, you keep walking back into it." Harry's eyes burned with fury. "This interview is over." "Then so is the illusion," Jake replied.